This is John with the latest on the NFL NFC playoff race heading into Week 13. Let's begin with a couple of the big winners from Week 12. And as a member of the fantasy football community, it pains me to say our mortal enemy and his Falcons were a big winner, now taking over first place in the NFC South with their big 5 wins. And the Packers are now very much in the wild card race with their huge win over the Lions, combined with a loss by the Vikings. They're now just a half game back. A couple of the big losers of the week. Vikings have dropped 2 in a row, which has taken them from being above the fray to having a target on their back for removal from the 7th seed. Not to be outdone, the Seahawks make a repeat appearance here, as they also have dropped 2 in a row and obliterated their comfy catbird seat they were occupying a couple weeks ago. Now for some numbers, and this is way more convoluted than the AFC. The trusty Commodore 64 digs deep into the remaining possibilities to try to get some intel. First thing it looks for is what is the bare minimum of wins each team needs to have any chance at the playoffs. The Eagles, 49ers, Lions, Cowboys, and Vikings have already reached their personal minimum and could in theory lose out and still have a chance. And cracking me up, since we are going on week 13, is that there are still many teams that could mathematically make the playoffs just by getting to 6 wins, with the computer saying the Saints, Commanders, Cardinals, and Seahawks would have to achieve the lofty goal of 7 wins to have any chance. Next, looking at the number of wins a team would need to avoid any wacky scenario leaving them out, and again, it's all over the place. The Buccaneers would guarantee a spot by winning out and getting to 10, as they would win the NFC South. The Falcons, Saints, and Vikings, it looks like they would be safe with 11, while the Lions, Cowboys, Eagles, 49ers, and Seahawks would need 12. The teams that cannot reach a win amount that would assure them of a spot do not control their own destiny. And that's the Panthers, Bears, Packers, Giants, Commanders, Rams, and Cardinals. All these numbers, however, are really just for wackadoodle scenarios. The important number is what is most realistically likely to have a reasonable odds of going dancing, and that number is 9 wins, although 8 is starting to creep up as not being outlandish. Going through the teams, starting with the NFC East, 2-team race, Eagles and Cowboys, shaping up to be a barn burner. Computer says the number that is likely to win the division is 13 wins. TeamRankings.com projections agree. They have the Eagles finishing with 1 more than needed, 14-3, with the Cowboys handily roping a wild card at 12-5. Thanks to them, as always, for letting me use their data. Eagles at 10-1 after another thrilling victory, unblemished in all NFC games, 82% chance to win the division, just about 100% to go to the playoffs. They can clinch a spot officially this week. I'll go into that later, but for now they are easily in my realistically in column. Another marquee matchup this week against the 49ers, then the rematch with the Cowboys. Those Cowboys, after another close 35-point game, might be the class of the conference if it wasn't for the Eagles. Likely just shooting for a wild card with 17% odds to win the division. They do have some tough opponents to finish the year. Seahawks this week, then Eagles, Bills, Dolphins, and Lions. So they can't coast in just yet, but they are close enough that I have them being realistically in. Giants at 4-8 puts them in my realistically out column, although that is not in as permanent ink as it was a couple of weeks ago, as the possible goal line keeps shifting lower. Ditto for the Commanders, realistically out at 4-8 for now anyway. In the NFC North, the Lions tried to give the Vikings a chance to get back into it, and the Vikings said no thank you, both losing to the bottom half of the division. Looks like just 10 wins should be good enough to take it. Team rankings has the Lions getting 11 with the Vikings getting a wild card at 9-8. And they actually do have 8 wins, being good enough to at least get into a tiebreak situation, with the Packers in their projections doing just that. Lions now 8-3 after the loss to the Packers. Still in good shape. Nice conference record. Still lead in the division. 82% odds to win the North and 95% to make the playoffs. Not a brutal remaining schedule. On my realistically in list. Travel to New Orleans this week and then Chicago next. Vikings fans getting nervous after scoring just 10 against the Bears. 6-6 going into their bye. Do have a nice conference record still with wins over the Falcons and Saints were they to be needed later. Not a terrible schedule either. Solidly in contention. 58% chance to make the playoffs. After the bye, they get the Raiders and Bengals before playing Detroit 2 out of the last 3. Packers with that big win gets them in the thick of things. 36% chance to make the playoffs. Do hold wins over the Saints and Rams that might come into play. A loss against the Falcons. In contention, although a game against the Chiefs might cure them of that diagnosis. Giants after that, which I would say would be an actual cure, but heck, who knows anymore. Bears at 4-8 going into their bye are realistically out for now. Once again, the Falcons are the class of the NFC South, and I use the word class very liberally. 3 teams in the fight at varying degrees of mediocrity. Projection is for just 8 or 9 wins to be good enough to win the division. Team rankings has the Saints and Falcons tying at 8 in their forecast. Falcons with that big win over the Saints to take over first place. 3-0 in the division, 50-50 to win the South. Not a stellar conference record if they find themselves having to hope for a wild card. Almost all of their odds to make the playoffs rest in winning the division. But that puts them solidly in contention. Play the Jets this week. Go Jets. Then the Buccaneers. Saints let us all down with that loss. Now 5-6 with poor division and conference records. 31% chance for the division and 38% overall. Do have a winnable remaining schedule, but have losses against the Packers and Vikings, which are starting to look important. In contention for the time being, tough matchup versus the Lions this week. Panthers and Giants following. Buccaneers fell to 4-7 with a loss to the Colts. Just 21% playoff chances. Do have a non-scary remaining schedule. Panthers this week. And more importantly, they are in the NFC South. So they are still in contention. Panthers at 1-10. And even in the NFC South, that is realistically out. With that soon to change to actually out. Out west, 49ers padded their lead and are runaway favorites to win the division. Seahawks and Rams hanging around 500. Computer says 10-11 will be good enough for the division. Team rankings has the 49ers running away with it at 13-4, with the Seahawks and Rams joining the 8-9 crowd for a chance. 49ers at 8-3 with victories over each of their division opponents so far, and a 6-1 conference record adds up to 84% odds to take the division, 96% to make the playoffs. Do have a couple of tough games coming up. Eagles this week, Ravens in a few, but they should be able to crank out a couple more wins. Remember when the Seahawks were in first place in the West? A long time ago, it seems. 6-5, still 60% chances to make the playoffs. Have a decent conference record, but lost the series to the Rams, which might come back to haunt them. And a brutal stretch right now, Cowboys, 49ers, Eagles, to test their in contention status. Rams with another must-win win to get back into the fray. 5-6 with a nice division record, but not so much on the conference record. Gives them 30% chances to be playoff bound. Owns the tiebreaker with the Seahawks, which I was penciling out a couple things that could really be important to be the second team from the West in multi-team ties for the wild card. Did lose to the Packers earlier, so keep that in mind. In contention. I don't think it will shock anyone that the Cardinals are realistically out and could be actually out this week. Recapping my own analysis, seems to me like 10 wins should be reasonably safe, so I have 4 teams in my realistically in column that either are already at 10 wins or should be able to attain that blindfolded. With 8 wins being a mark that would at least give a team some hope, I have 5 teams that cannot even achieve that or would really need to pour it on to get there. Obviously, things can change quickly, but for now, that would leave 7 teams fighting for 3 remaining spots. For Week 13, computer says the Eagles would clinch a playoff spot with a win and a Rams loss. This gets really complicated as to why a Rams loss is necessary. Basically, without it, there would be a 1 in a zillion chance that a bunch of teams all could end up tied with the Eagles for a wild card. And without the loss, the Rams could win the multi-team tie before their loss to the Eagles becomes relevant in a head-to-head situation. In more news that is not shocking, the Panthers and Cardinals are eliminated with losses. Finally, there are just 4 intra-conference games for Week 13. Here is what is better for the teams that are in the middle of the fight, as in not on my already realistically in or out lists. Seahawks at Cowboys. Everyone better off of the Cowboys knocking Seattle further into the quicksand. Panthers at Buccaneers. Everyone better off of the Panthers dragging the Buccaneers down with the ship. Lions at Saints. Only the Rams and Seahawks should root for the Saints to help their own cause. Everyone else better off of the Saints exiting the wildcard race. 49ers at Eagles. Computer says for some unexplained reason the Falcons' chances are slightly better with a 49ers win, and everyone else is better off of an Eagles win. I think in all likelihood it really isn't going to matter, as both of these teams are going to the playoffs regardless of this game's outcome. That's it for now. My site is playoffcomputer.fspot.com if you'd like to support my obsession with playoff races or check out the tool to analyze your own fantasy league. Comments, questions, suggestions are welcome. Enjoy your day.